Sorry. So some of these points are, we will always start from, okay, who is our target audience? What is the objective? So that is something we have discussed. But then more practical questions. How much time do we have? Government is considering a legislation on the House of Floor, or on the House of the Parliament. And normally it has one reading, two readings, three readings, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. How much time do we have? And that defines the time for the advocacy, campaign, and which tools can be selected. And then could be also, let's say, a crisis, an external financial crisis. Could be a national resource-oriented crisis. So can be something very temporary, which can be used to build on the advocacy agenda. It can also be not necessarily a crisis. It can also be, as I remember, the word opportunity. That can also come from a funder side, a discussion between the funder and the think tank leading to a project. And then the budget. Budget will have impact, actually. And then what kind of resources and staffing do we have inside the think tank? What kind of skills do we have? Do we have the economists, researchers? Do we have communication specialists, and all that? So some of these factors would matter in selecting one or many or all of these tools. So I consider these as maybe 5 major tools for advocacy. There could be more. So research, I think that is very clearly established. Yesterday we discussed the importance of research. This is like coming out of your data, your original research, your fact finding, your analysis, your surveys, and your policy analysis. VEPR brought some publications yesterday. Others also have similar research done. Public education is different from research. In public education, you're reaching out to, let's say we talk about vlog, right? So you talk about grassroots campaigns, you talk about town halls, you talk about going to public, talking to them in villages or in small citizen assemblies. There's this new concept is emerging, citizen assembly. And so that is, again, some of it may be based on research, but the audience becomes a very different set of people as opposed to research, because then research would only be limited, obviously, to the readers of this data, newspaper readers, analysis, etc. In media campaign, again, you may have certain facts, and then you want to project those facts to the media. You don't organize town halls, if you like. You just select a medium. Okay, you can talk about a newspaper. You can select a social media campaign. You can talk about TV campaign. But then again, you're not physically organizing something, but you're using the medium which exists. Another possible tool is lobbying. This is a bit controversial. Lobbying is generally used, especially in the US, American context. Lobbying is used in a very particular context where you are, let's say some business groups or some interest groups are approaching the members of the Congress to press upon certain amendments, introduction of laws, and in US you have to declare yourself if you are a lobby, registered yourself accordingly. Many of them work with corporates, There's also this very, I think, peculiar American culture where the politicians, political parties get funded, and that becomes a part of the lobbying exercise. Therefore, I would say it depends what purpose you are using lobbying for, because lobbying may remain invisible. It is not you're not talking about public education. You're not talking about media campaign. You're talking about going to certain set of individuals who have access to power, legislation, and convincing them that why we need this legislation or not that legislation. But it can be used effectively also for good purposes. And then closed door briefings. So in many cases, when you are, let's say you don't want to involve public and open discussions, but you would like to go into a government office, and you like to offer based on your research. This is what we have found. We talked about budget. Yesterday there was discussion about the budget transparency, and your research might be showing that look, the government will face a budgetary crisis if it is not fixed in the right time, if it is not made too transparent, if let's say subsidies are not if subsidies are continued, then it will have a problem. So there could be different reasons why you would not like to go and openly talk about. And many politicians and civil servants would appreciate you coming to them in closed door briefings and not bringing them into, let's say, seminars. I mean, at Ideas we do both. We do both open seminars in which we bring the members of parliament in the open panel discussion, but we also go to them and organize a meeting in which they would invite maybe 10 members of their ministry, other experts, and there will be a team of researchers who will be presenting something to the minister or the civil servant. And this can also work. This provides a candid environment where the respondent or the audience, members of the audience, can actually react more openly to your proposal. This can also be obviously different tools can be combined, but then we go back to the question of the budget and the time resources we have in terms of what kind of tools can we employ and what tools can we leave. Okay, let's say. Let me just ask for any interventions here. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, if you can give a percentage, is it necessary every advocacy tools, all the research data needs to do every advocacy tools?
Yeah.
That's one question. So my second question is how you prioritize. Which one is very important? Which is are you referring to? Okay, research is more important than public educations, or every advocacy tools is very important?
Yeah. No, I think for that, I mean that's why you need to go back to this. Sorry. So if you want to decide which tools are important, which tools are more important than others, and which tools you can actually employ, I suggest ask yourself these questions. And if answering these questions will help you, I think, in deciding, okay, do we have 3 months? Do we have 2 years? So that will immediately, so if you have 3 months, for example, you will not like to do extensive research, because good research can take a year or 6 months. And so already you will say, oh, no, this does not call for a detailed research. Let's assemble some quick facts and go for a meeting with the minister, something urgent perhaps happening. So that will drive your selection. So I think these questions or criteria would drive the selection of the audience. Of the advocacy tools, and not all of them are necessary, certainly.
On the other hand, if you didn't base your advocacy on, to some extent, research, if you didn't have much in the way of education, or if you didn't base it on, in a way, a core philosophical position that your institution is taking, and we're just concentrating on lobbying and so on and so forth, then one would wonder whether you were actually a policy think tank.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. I think so let's say if you don't have an original research of yourself, first of all, that's the difference. I would differentiate between having your own philosophical position or worldview, which does not always require sort of new research reports. You are known for certain positions, and then you can build on that position and present something on that basis. Secondly, many times other institutions, especially universities, have done good research, which is often not coming out, and we can always benefit from that research. So it's not that we have done research; someone else has done research. But then typically, I know many of our friends also teach in university. But if you are just in a university and not associated with a sort of a think tank culture, then you will be just happy in publishing in an academic journal and not come out of it. So in that way, you are still using research, but then you are not entirely dependent on conducting your own research. And frankly, I think think tanks, as my friend, one of my friends from Pakistan often used to say, think tanks operate under a coherent set of biases. So this coherent set of biases, which I use a nice word for it, worldview, is not there, then sometimes it leads to, of course, a selection bias. Right? So you like to maybe choose one research over other, but that's I believe that's what differentiates a think tank from a normal academic research institution, because each think tank is driven by certain missions. But yeah, research is important. You don't have to do it yourself.
And can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about the public education and who should be the audience when we do the public education?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, it goes back to the advocacy objective and the audience. So it can be very specific members. So let's say you're doing you're talking about a new youth policy. So many countries have now these youth policies. Now, so the youth policy would obviously then be targeted as the very young segments of the population. So we would say that, okay, what are the youth? How do we define youth? So UN defined the youth from the age 15 years to 24 years. Malaysia recently redefined its youth and downgraded. It's 30. It used to be 40.
40.
It used to be 14, now
30.
It used to be 40. So in Malaysia, you are young if 40. And expired. But now 30
we still
years.
have 2 years before the policy implemented.
Oh,
So we're
okay.
still young.
Yeah. It doesn't affect me in any case. I'm not bothered. I'm way out of it. So you will only select then members of the youth in that age group. But then you will say, oh, we need youth from universities. We need youth from not, let's say, not so well educated. Then you will say, we need youth from the urban areas and we need youth from the rural areas. So it's you need to select about the sample when we talk about public education. Because then public education certainly demands a lot more resources if you're doing this way. It can be cheaper if you are going on the social media, but if you're going physical, face-to-face contact, it needs a lot of resources and a lot more time than let's say a quick media campaign. So in public education, therefore, you again go back to definition of target audience and think about the objective, and then come back to segmentation. I've here shown a very simple spectrum, which I have tried to place. I mean, this is of course subjective, but I have tried to place these 5 advocacy tools on the spectrum of time and budget. So you have less time, you have more time, you have low budget, and you have high budget. So I have placed lobbying at this corner where both the time and the budget is low. All you need to do is pick up the right persons to meet. Maybe 5 meetings. Of course, that means that the person who are going to present some opinion in that meeting should be an academic expert, should be, can be a board member, can be a CEO, whoever it is, influential, and have some weight in his or her opinion. But I think it doesn't need a lot of budget. It doesn't need a lot of time. All you need is arranging those meetings, presenting your case, and I've placed closed door briefings. Doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes a little bit more resources because you need to prepare presentations, etc., some research. I've placed media campaigns somewhere in the middle. It needs some time, and also it needs some resources. Research in public education happen to be on the other, like on more the far up and the right side, means that good research needs time and good research needs budget also. So, and public education relatively low on the budget, but maybe more on the time, because it takes a lot of time to actually influence the members of the public for any opinion. I think it's the hardest thing to do, to be honest. How to change it?
Is it possible for us as a think tank to include public demonstration in lobbying? I mean, and how can we frame the structure of doing that kind of thing?
So these are 2 different tools. When you say public demonstration, do you mean like street going out in the street and so that's a different thing. And normally, I mean, of course, public demonstrations are led by more popular figures, politicians, religious leaders, and community leaders. I think they are the ones who are organizing mostly the public demonstrations. I am not aware of think tank doing it.
Okay.
And
do you think it's possible for us to?
It is possible, but it needs a very different kind of political and social capital. Think tanks normally do not have that kind of capital. They cannot just mobilize people on the streets. And maybe in very occasional or special circumstances they can combine with others and do it, but I have never come across a think tank doing a public demonstration. I think it's risky because then you're also maybe talking about very popular positions in which you want to bring. Yeah, so lobbying is a very different exercise altogether. Identification of people.
Yeah, the Walk Against Corruption that Transparency International does in PNG every year. It's not a demonstration as such, it's an orderly event, just generic, instead of taking a stand, and it gets people from government, civil society, the private sector, all to participate and show their commitment to that cause. gets very large numbers of people out there, and all their groups have to make a contribution, so it's a fundraising exercise. We're not bringing down the government in the process, but government doesn't want to be seen to be opposing it, so they'll usually try and send some people to
support it. Yeah.
To support it.
It's a good example. Organizing a walk. It's
Then everyone's healthier at the end,
It's exactly yeah.
unless they're run over.
Yeah. No, it's a good example. I like it. I mean, walks are certainly something more public and help, and they are not public demonstration. Great. So let me walk you through the project which we are implementing for last almost 2 years, and now it's entered into more mature stage. And so this is a project which we started. This is on health issues. So not an economic issue, not a political issue, but it's more of a health issue. Rare diseases, which is there are about I think 7,000 or 8,000 rare diseases in the world, which are for only 5% of which any treatment is available. So spinal-muscular diseases, you might have heard, SMA. Most of these diseases are genetic in nature. And a peculiar problem with these diseases is that since the treatment is very costly, the vaccination process and R&D process, in which the private pharmaceutical companies are involved, is also very costly. So there's not enough strong incentive for them to undertake this field, and so therefore there is a very limited supply of effective treatment. There are some countries in the world which have developed some policy framework for supporting the patients who are diagnosed with these or one of the rare diseases. And normally, I think it's also a case where markets, private sector alone cannot do much. It needs a lot of combined efforts from the private sector, from the government, from the social, from the charitable sector, etc. What was the sort of opportunity there? Let me explain in just applying the framework which we developed yesterday, but also updating it with the tools we just discussed. So remember this graph? Some of you shared on the Facebook. You did. So what was the opportunity? Why ideas started a campaign? What was the objective? So ideas work with private sector. One of our also strategies is to work with the local companies. And this was raised when we meet with the private sector, with the business companies. This was raised as one of the possible areas. Malaysia does not have a policy to tackle rare diseases, and therefore it was identified that if ideas can help us in some research, public education and advocacy, to encourage the Malaysian government to develop a policy framework how to do it. So there is some budget allocation for meeting treatment, which is not huge, but there is no policy framework. So in the absence of policy framework, then a lot of discretion is there for practitioners, for clinicians. Different patient groups approach the ministry or the hospital. There is no clear mechanism who gets what. So a lot depends on the hospital administrations and the access. Who gets access gets more treatment. Who gets less access may remain out of that limited beneficiary circle. So that calls for a sort of a framework or a policy, and the industry approached us. So we took it as an opportunity because we thought it's like a niche area. It doesn't require to radically change anything. It requires the government to consider some of the problems and then maybe adopt the policy framework. So our objective was very simple. Introduction of a document which the Ministry of Health would adopt or prepare to be called tentatively national policy on rare diseases. The audience was the Ministry of Health, who would write their policy, but ultimately any such policies need to be approved by the cabinet. So therefore, Ministry of Health, but if Ministry of Health has to sponsor first of all such a policy, it's not a legislation, it's just a policy. And then different tools were adopted. The budget was generous, and the time was also not urgent. It is not something which was not driven by crisis. It was driven by need identified by consultation with the industry and the government. So therefore we had a good time before us, and we adopted actually all the tools which we have discussed in their process, and then we started implementing it. So I'm going to share with you how, where we are, and how did we achieve it. So the current status of the project is after about 1.5 to 2 years process, the Ministry of Health has already announced its own framework to tackle rare diseases, and this we consider a success. Although a formal announcement is to be made in terms of like actual document needs to be made, but at least the whole process has been internalized. And so let's go back when we started this project. So as a strategy, we thought that, okay, first of all, we need the right kind of people who would do research and advocacy for this work. So they're all well experienced medical professionals, health economists, clinicians who are already in the system. You will not see, of course, they're not ideal staff member. They are independently employed people, university professors, government employees, etc. And we made a working group. So making of a working group was a key strategy to ensure that this whole agenda, especially when you talk about industry, pharmaceutical industry in specific, there can be a lot of questions of the motives behind the work. So we made sure that we are talking to independently known professionals and explaining like, look, why we are doing this. So they agreed to become a working group, which would meet at least after every 6 months. We also did an analysis, like where are the groups, where are the stakeholders, and we realized that a lot of groups, NGOs, parent groups already are existing in this space. So we did a quick analysis or mapping. These are the names of the different groups which are in Malaysia, including an umbrella organization, MRDS. So we obviously engaged with all of them in the very beginning. That look, they are there for last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, depending on their own, mostly driven by parents. But we wanted them to come and support this idea. They recognized the importance of it, so they supported the idea. We did some research, we published papers, So, I showed you the names, Professor Tom, Dr. Azlina, they were the authors of the first paper which we published. And then more technical paper, improving access to orphan drugs in Malaysia, Health Economist. And all these papers were launched in media, in seminars. Some pictures of the events. I mean, we were doing public events. So public events means that, of course, this was a well-defined target segment. People diagnosed with rare diseases, parents of the patients, the civil society groups who are working or advocating the cause, concerned health professionals, concerned employees of the Ministry of Health. So all of them were brought together in a symposium. We have held a couple of symposiums. And then we also outreach to members of the parliament. We made, we organized briefings to the members of the parliament. We also did one-to-one meetings with the ministry, with the other industry, with the different industry group, with business associations like insurance companies. And then through a process of research if you go back to our this advocacy tools, through process of research, the papers, then we engage in the public education by talking to the groups on the ground, face to face. Several consultations were held, a media campaign. We published opinion articles, used social media also, raising awareness about this issue. I mean, it's not that we were doing it for the first time, but all the patient groups said that each year there's also this special rare disease day, which is on in March. So there was this level of awareness, but then the key problem which patient groups identified, that government was not listening in terms of bringing them all together into a framework. And I think that is where the importance of research, the importance of engaging with independent experts came in. So we also did one-to-one meetings, and in the end we also had briefings to the Ministry of Health officials and ultimately to the Minister of Health. And frankly, the response from the government in many occasions have actually been surprising, in positive sense. They became on board. There were some concerns also. There were who is funding it? Why they are funding it? And so we were always okay, this is the name of the funder, and this is how we are doing, this is why we are doing it, to begin with. To make sure that these questions about, what is the motive, are addressed in that fund. I have shared yesterday with you that in any case, whoever wants to approach the funders, the name of the funders, go on website as you can see. So this was overcome by maintaining this transparency. But then, did we have something original to say? Did we have really some original data? The answer was yes. So the research was done. Different cross-country comparisons were made, which countries have done this kind of work. They were consulted, and so that was helpful. And now the ministry has asked us to provide them data support, research support, and they have already organized a forum, which was not done by us, but it was by them. And that was the time when we decided when we saw, this is very important lessons which we learn also in the implementation. in the initial stage of the planning, we had all these tools drawn, but then we also we were heavy on media campaign. But when we started getting a positive response from the government, when we realized the government is listening and coming to our meetings, sending the presentation, we actually reduced our media appearances. Because some of these media appearances can be very critical. And of course the patient groups who are suffering, unfortunately, from these diseases, patients, families, everyone wants to have their share, maximum share of the budget. It's unfortunately limited resources and a lot more demand. So we realized that if this would happen, then this would be not helpful for coming up with a policy framework, because then it will become more very emotional campaign. We wanted to keep it closer to the evidence and research and what can be done in the current circumstances, and how these resources need to be allocated, what is the role of the private sector, what changes needs to be made by the insurance companies to sponsor or to include it in their schemes, in their premium what they collect. So these kind of recommendations have been built into the policy framework. But now government is doing it itself. We have taken a sort of a back seat. We are in the consultation. We are not even, the government appointed some interministerial committees. We are not there. All these committees are comprised of officials. And we are happy with that. And as long as the government has taken up this thing. So I think it's a good case to be studied for how to employ the research and advocacy to achieve your goal. Not free, it's not without challenges, and we have been fortunate, as I said in the beginning, to have a generous funder to undertake this research and advocacy. We're not that lucky in every case, and I'm sure this is quite challenging. But still, I thought